He locked his pregnant wife in a freezing garage, left her there for 8 hours, went back to bed and slept like nothing happened. She almost died. Her baby almost died. What he did not know. Her father owned that house. Her father had thermal cameras. Her father watched everything from 1,400 miles away. And her father was a billionaire with very expensive lawyers. This is a story about survival, betrayal, and the most satisfying revenge you will ever hear. If you love justice being served, smash that like button right now. Comment your prediction for how this ends. And subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Let us begin. At 3:14 in the morning, I stopped shivering. That is when I knew I was dying. 8 months pregnant, locked in a garage where the temperature had dropped to 31 degrees. And my husband was sleeping in our heated bedroom, just 12 inches of drywall away. I could hear the furnace humming on the other side of that wall. 72 degrees of warmth existed just beyond a door he had locked from the inside. My name is Caroline Porter. 4 years ago, I graduated top of my class from Yale Law School. I turned down my father's money to build my own life. I married a man I thought loved me for who I was, not for the billions I had walked away from. Grant Mercer forgot one thing when he locked me in this garage. I was not just his victim. I was a porter, and porters do not die quietly. The concrete floor had stolen every degree of heat from my body hours ago. My fingers were numb. My lower back had seized into a solid wall of pain that made me gasp with every movement. But my mind was clear, clearer than it had been in years. I forced myself to sit up. The yoga mat beneath me provided almost no insulation. The fleece blanket Grant had so generously tossed at me before locking the door was thin enough to see through. This was not accidental. This was calculated. The baby moved inside me. 32 weeks along, my daughter fighting to stay warm in a body that was slowly shutting down. That movement cut through the fog in my brain, sharper than any cold. I will not die here. I will not let my daughter die here. I crawled to the door first, tried the handle again, knowing it would not work. The lock clicked uselessly. I had tried it 47 times in the past 6 hours, but a good attorney documents everything, and I was documenting this moment in my memory. Time, temperature, evidence. The garage windows had frosted over from the inside. Single pane glass, old and drafty. Breaking through would cut me badly, and the cold outside was worse than the cold inside. Not an option, not yet. Grant's golf club stood in the corner. I pulled myself upright, using his bag as support. My legs threatened to buckle. I grabbed the 9-iron and approached the door connecting the garage to the house. I could break through. I was strong enough. But then what? Grant would wake up. He would perform his concerned husband routine. He would call his mother. They would have more evidence that I was unstable, erratic, a danger to myself and the baby. I was a lawyer. I understood how these games worked. The prenuptial agreement I had signed contained a clause about psychological fitness. If I could be declared mentally unfit, I would lose everything, including my daughter. I lowered the golf club. Smarter. I needed to be smarter. The far corner of the garage held boxes of Christmas decorations, summer furniture, and old appliances Grant had never bothered to throw away. I limped toward them, my frozen feet screaming with every step. Behind the boxes, I found it, an old space heater from the previous owners, dusty, forgotten, but possibly functional. My hands shook as I plugged it in, boss. The outlets sparked. The coils flickered orange, then faded. I adjusted the dial with fingers I could barely feel. Tried again. Heat. Weak, but real. I pulled the heater close and crouched beside it, letting the warmth seep into my bones 1 degree at a time. I was not going to die tonight, but I was going to remember every second of this. Every moment of carefully constructed cruelty that Grant Mercer thought he could explain away. The garage door to the house clicked open at 6:23 in the morning. Grant stood in the doorway wearing silk pajamas and a concerned expression. Light spilled around him like a halo. Behind him, the warmth of our home called to me like salvation. Caroline, his voice dripped with manufactured worry. What are you doing out here? You must have been sleepwalking again. I looked at him, really looked. The handsome face I had fallen in love with at a charity gala 4 years ago. The charming smile that had convinced me he was different from all the other wealthy men who had pursued me for my last name. The careful performance of husbandly concern that had fooled everyone, including me. The door was locked. I said, My voice came out as a whisper, damage from hours of screaming that no one heard. Was it? Grant crossed to me with practiced ease. He took the golf club from my hands, set it aside gently. You are freezing. Come inside. I will make you some tea. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders. His body heat felt like fire against my skin. I let him lead me inside because that was what I always did. That was the role I had learned to play in 4 years of marriage to a monster wearing a handsome face. But something had shifted inside me on that garage floor. Something had broken. Or maybe something had finally healed. I was done being the woman who made excuses. Done being the wife who apologized for her own abuse. Grant Mercer did not know it yet, but he had made the worst mistake of his life. He had given me a reason to fight back. He had threatened my daughter. And I was going to destroy him. The kitchen gleamed under recessed lighting. Marble counters, Viking appliances, a refrigerator that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Everything perfect. Everything pristine. Everything a lie I had helped build. Grant guided me to a stool and wrapped a cashmere throw around my shoulders. He moved to the stove and filled the kettle, each motion precise and practiced. You scared me, he said without turning around. I woke up and you were gone. I searched the whole house before I thought to check the garage. The door was locked from the inside, I repeated. I could not have locked it from outside. That is strange. Grant measured loose-leaf chamomile into a ceramic pot. I will have someone look at the mechanism tomorrow. Old houses have quirks. He knew I knew. He did not care. That was the most terrifying part. He was so confident in his control that he did not even bother with convincing lies anymore. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug he offered. The heat stung my frozen fingers. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow, I said. Do you? His eyebrows lifted in polite interest. I do not remember that being on the calendar. I scheduled it last week. Grant sipped his own tea. I am sure it can be rescheduled. You look exhausted. You should stay home and rest. It was not a suggestion. It never was. I looked down at my tea, at the thin gold band on my finger that had once meant everything. That ring felt like a shackle now. But I had learned something important tonight. Shackles could be broken. Locks could be picked. And monsters could be destroyed. I just had to be patient. I just had to be smart. I drank my tea and said nothing, and I began to plan. The morning light filtered through plantation shutters as I woke in the master bedroom. Egyptian cotton sheets, goose-down pillows, a mattress that cost more than most cars, the trappings of wealth that had become the buzz of my cage. Grant had already left for work. His note sat on the pillow beside me, elegant handwriting on cream cardstock. Canceled your appointment. You need rest. See you for dinner. Love, G. I crumpled the note in my fist. My hands trembled from cold that still lived in my bones. From rage I could not afford to express. Not yet. The mirror in the bathroom showed me the damage. Bruises bloomed across my lower back in shades of purple and green where I had fallen on the concrete. My lips were chapped and cracked. Dark circles ringed my eyes like someone had punched me. I looked like a victim of violence because I was one. The realization landed with surprising calm. I had been denying this truth for longer than I could admit. Abuse came in many forms, and I had married a master of the subtle kind. I showered for 45 minutes. Let the hot water pound my aching muscles until my skin turned pink. Stood under the spray long after the warmth had penetrated, because getting out meant facing reality. Dorothy appeared at the bedroom doorway as I finished dressing. The housekeeper had worked for the Mercer family for 15 years. She kept her eyes carefully blank as she announced that Miss Mercer Sr. had arrived for an unscheduled visit. Judith, of course, because this day was not already terrible enough. I descended the curved staircase with as much dignity as I could manage. Judith Mercer sat in the formal living room like she owned the place, which, according to Grant, she technically did. The Mercer family trust held the deed. Caroline. Judith did not rise, did not offer a hug or a cheek to kiss. Just that sharp assessment that always made me feel measured and found wanting. You look tired. Good morning, Judith. Pregnancy does not suit some women. She sipped her tea from bone china that had been in the family for 4 generations. My sister was the same way, positively haggard by the 3rd trimester. I lowered myself carefully into the chair across from her. My back screamed in protest. Grant mentioned you had an episode last night. The word hung between us. Episode. As if being locked in a freezing garage was something I had done. something that was my fault. I must have been sleepwalking, I said. The lie tasted like ash. Judith set down her teacup with a precise click. Preston's father's first wife had similar problems. Very sad. She had to be managed eventually. Managed? I felt ice form in my veins. What do you mean? Managed? These things run in families, you know. Instability. Grant is understandably concerned about the baby, about what kind of mother you might be. The words landed like blows. Precise, calculated, designed to wound, and suddenly I understood they were not just controlling me, they were building a case. Crazy, pregnant wife, unstable, a danger to herself and the baby, needs to be managed, committed. I appreciate your concern, I said carefully, but I am fine, just tired. Of course you are, dear. Judith smiled. It did not reach her eyes. These things often start small. A little forgetfulness, wandering at night. Before you know it, she waved a manicured hand. Well, Grant knows the best people, the most discreet facilities. You would be well cared for. I thought about my daughter, about the nursery upstairs painted in soft yellows and greens, about spending my daughter's birth in some facility while the Mercers raised my child over my dead body. I should rest, I said, standing despite the pain. Doctor's orders. Oh yes, Grant mentioned he canceled your appointment. So thoughtful of him. He really does know what is best for you. I climbed the stairs with as much dignity as I could manage, closed the bedroom door behind me, locked it for whatever good that would do. Then I sank to the floor and pressed my hands against my belly where my daughter kicked. I had been so stupid. The signs were all there. The isolation from friends and family, the subtle criticisms that eroded my confidence, the financial control that left me completely dependent, the gaslighting that made me question my own reality. Textbook abuse. I had studied it in law school, recognized it in other women, promised myself I would never fall victim. And yet here I was. 4 years ago, I had been so certain I was different. I had fled my father's world deliberately, took a job at a nonprofit making $42,000 a year, told no one about the Porter billions. I wanted to be loved for myself, not for my trust fund. Grant had seemed perfect, charming but humble, wealthy but grounded. He pursued me with flowers and handwritten notes and elaborate dates that showed he was paying attention to who I actually was. I love that you are not impressed by money, he had said on our third date. Most women I meet only see dollar signs. I did not tell him I was not impressed, because I had grown up with 100 times more than he would ever have. Looking back, I could see the cracks. The way his charm had an edge when he did not get his way. The way his humility curdled into resentment when I succeeded at something. The way his attention felt less like love and more like surveillance. But I had been so desperate to prove I could build a life without my father's shadow. So determined to show I did not need the Porter name or the Porter money. I had chosen the one man insecure enough to need to control a woman he thought was beneath him. And now I was paying for that choice with everything I had. Unless I did something about it. Grant's study occupied the corner of the second floor. Dark wood, leather chairs, a desk that allegedly belonged to some Mercer ancestor. The door was always locked. I had never questioned it, never pushed, never done anything except accept that some spaces in my own home were not mine to enter. That ended today. The lock on Grant's study was simple. A basic tumbler that yielded to a bobby pin after 10 minutes of patient work. My college roommate had taught me during a weekend of questionable decisions. I never thought I would use the skill to break into my own husband's office. The study smelled like Grant. Expensive cologne and paper and something sour beneath it. The smell of secrets rotting behind a polished facade. I moved quickly. Dorothy was downstairs, but her loyalty belonged to the Mercers. I had maybe an hour before she came looking for me. The desk held the usual things: business correspondence, a Mont Blanc pen, a crystal paperweight shaped like a ship, honoring the family's shipping fortune. The bottom drawer was locked. I found the key in his sock drawer. Men were predictable that way. Inside the drawer, my world fell apart. Bank statements, a separate account I had never seen, transfers to someone named N, Cross, $30,000 over 6 months. Bethany Natalie Cross, Grant's executive assistant, the one who always smiled too wide when I visited his office, the one who touched his arm just a beat too long. I photographed every page with shaking hands, not because I had a plan, because some instinct from my father's world told me that evidence was survival. Beneath the bank statements, I found something worse. A folder labeled Asset Protection contained legal documents, preliminary but detailed. A petition for sole custody, grounds stated as maternal mental instability, supporting documentation from a psychiatrist I had never met, a Dr. Robert Matthews, with credentials from institutions I had never visited. And there at the bottom, a prenuptial agreement amendment, voiding my claim to marital assistance in cases of psychological unfitness, as determined by medical evaluation. They were not just controlling me, they were building a prison. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The isolation, the gaslighting, the witnesses to my so-called episodes. Judith's comments about facilities and management. They were going to have me committed, take my baby, erase me from their perfect Mercer family narrative. All while I smiled and played the grateful wife and never saw the trap closing around me. I was not crazy. I had known something was wrong. I just had not been ready to see it. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number? Houston area code. Houston. My father lived in Houston. I had blocked his number 4 years ago when I decided to build a life he could not control. He had called for months afterward, sent letters, had his assistant reach out through every possible channel. Eventually he stopped trying. Or so I thought. I silenced the phone and shoved it under my pillow. Whatever my father wanted, it would have to wait. I had a husband to investigate first. The text messages between Grant and Natalie were saved in a folder on his computer, password protected. But his password was the same for everything. His mother's birthday followed by the year he graduated from prep school. I had cracked it years ago and never told him. The messages destroyed any remaining illusion I had about my marriage. She is so naive it almost makes me feel bad. Grant had written, "Once the baby comes, we will have everything. Your mother's plan is genius. She will never see it coming." Your mother? Not my mother. Natalie and Judith were working together, the mistress and the mother-in-law, united in their plan to steal my daughter. Another message from Natalie. What about the prenup? She signed it before you told her about the trust issues. Grant's response made my blood run cold. The prenup has an instability clause. Mom's psychiatrist friend will provide the diagnosis. Carolyn will be in a facility before the baby turns 1 month old. Then we file for divorce on grounds of abandonment, and I get everything. Her trust fund pays our debts. The shipping company survives. And you and I finally get our life together. Well, 12 years I have waited for this, Natalie had replied. Do not mess it up now. 12 years. Grant had known Natalie for 12 years. They had been together before he ever met me. Their relationship had never ended. I was just the mark, the wealthy fool they had identified and targeted. I sat in Grant's leather chair and let the truth wash over me. 4 years of my life, built on lies from the very first moment. The man who had courted me with flowers had been planning to destroy me before our first date. My phone buzzed again. The Houston number. This time, I answered. Caroline, my father's voice. Older than I remembered. Rougher, like he had been screaming or crying or both. How did you get this number? I have always had this number. Sweetheart, I should hang up. Should tell him to leave me alone. Should remind him that I had built a life without his help and I did not need his interference now. But something in his voice stopped me. Something broken. I know what he did to you last night. My blood turned to ice. I do not know what you are talking about. I have thermal imaging cameras on all my properties, including the house I bought through a shell company 4 years ago, the one your husband thinks belongs to his family trust. The world tilted. I gripped the desk to keep from falling. You own our house. I own a lot of things, sweetheart. I own the bank that holds your husband's business loans. I own the shipping company that his family's fortune depends on. His voice cracked. I have owned them since a month before your wedding. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. My father had not stepped back, had not respected my wishes for independence. He had been controlling, manipulating, pulling strings from the shadows, like he always did. You had no right. I had every right. His voice cracked. You are my daughter, and that man locked you in a garage like an animal while you carried my grandchild. You were spying on me. I was protecting you. The only way you would let me. Another pause. Carolyn, Shion. I watched the footage. I watched you nearly freeze to death, and I could not do anything. Do you understand what that felt like? I thought about my mother, about how Margaret Porter had always been the translator between father and daughter, the one who made my father's overbearing love feel like actual love instead of control. Without her, I had run. Running had not saved me. It had just changed the cage. What do you want? I asked finally. I can destroy him. Today, this afternoon, in his business, his reputation, his family name. I can leave him with nothing but the clothes on his back. And if I do not want that, then I wait. I watch. I protect you from the shadows like I have been doing for 4 years. His breath shuddered through the phone. But Carolyn, I am asking you to let me help. Not because I want to control you, because I am scared, because I love you, because your mother would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you. I sat in Grant's office, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, tears streaming down my face. I am not coming home. I said, Caroline, not yet, but I am not staying either. I looked at the folder of evidence, at the messages planning my destruction, at the life I had built on a foundation of lies. I need to do this my way, but I need your help. For the first time in 4 years, William Porter let someone else lead. What do you need? He asked. Everything. I need to know everything. Dorothy was in the kitchen when I came downstairs. She stood at the sink, washing dishes, her back rigid with the particular tension of someone who knew more than she was supposed to. I watched her for a moment from the doorway. 58 years old, 15 years with the Mercer family. Her grandson Miguel had been living with her for 3 years, working toward his green card through the proper channels. Slow, expensive, bureaucratic channels that left him vulnerable. Grant had made sure she knew exactly how vulnerable. Dorothy? She turned. The dish in her hands nearly slipped. Mrs. Mercer, can I help you with something? I walked into the kitchen and sat on the stool across from her, the same stool where I had drunk tea this morning while Grant pretended the garage incident never happened. Last night, I said quietly, you heard me screaming. Dorothy's hands stilled on the dish. Her face went carefully blank. I do not know what you mean, ma'am. The door was locked from inside the house. Someone had to have locked it. I pressed forward, and someone had to have heard me pounding on it for hours, begging to be let out. Silence stretched between us. I could see the conflict in her eyes, fear warring with something else. Guilt, maybe, or shame. I am a lawyer, Dorothy. Immigration law was not my specialty, but I know people, good people who have helped families like yours before. Her eyes flickered. Hope, quickly suppressed. If we get out of this, I said, I will personally ensure Miguel gets his papers. The best immigration attorneys in the country will handle his case. My father can make it happen in months instead of years. Your father? Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. You mean William Porter? She knew. Of course she knew. The staff always knew more than they let on. I mean William Porter, I confirmed. And I mean every word. But I need your help first. Dorothy set down the dish. Her hands were shaking. Mercer told me, she said slowly. He told me if I ever said anything to anyone, one phone call, that is all it would take. Miguel would be detained, deported. Everything he has worked for, gone. I know. Grant uses people's vulnerabilities like weapons. He has been using mine for 4 years. Dorothy looked at me then, really looked, and something in her expression shifted. Last night, she said, I heard you screaming. I wanted to unlock the door. I almost did. But my daughter called me. She was upset about Miguel's latest application delay. And I thought about what Mr. Mercer said, and she stopped, tears filling her eyes. I am so sorry. Mrs. Mercer, I am so sorry I did not help you. I reached across the counter and took her hand. You are helping me now, I said. That is what matters. We talked for an hour. Dorothy's words poured out like water through a broken dam. 15 years of observations. 15 years of secrets she had been forced to keep. Grant's affairs. Natalie was not the first and would not be the last. There had been at least 4 others over the years, all handled discreetly with payments and non-disclosure agreements. His financial schemes. The shipping company had been hemorrhaging money for a decade. Grant had been moving funds between accounts, robbing Peter to pay Paul, creating a paper trail of fraud that would make federal prosecutors weep with joy. His phone calls. Late at night, when he thought everyone was asleep, to a man he only called by his first name, Marcus, Dorothy said. He calls him Marcus. They talk about handling problems. making things go away. Do you know who Marcus is? Dorothy shook her head. But after those calls, Mr. Mercer is always calmer, like he has solved something. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Grant was not just planning to have me committed. He had a backup plan, a permanent solution. There is something else, Dorothy said hesitantly. Last night, after the garage, Mr. Mercer received a phone call. He was very upset when he got off. Who called him? I do not know, but I heard him say something. She paused, her face pale. He said his wife was becoming a liability, and he needed to accelerate the timeline. I sat very still. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Thank you, Dorothy. I squeezed her hand. You may have just saved my life. What will you do now? I am going to do what I should have done 4 years ago. I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. I am going to fight back. That afternoon, I put the first phase of my plan into action. Using Dorothy's phone, I called my sister Lauren. Caroline. Lauren's voice held 4 years of worry and frustration. Are you okay? I have been trying to reach you for months. I know. I am sorry. I could not explain now. Not over the phone. But I need your help. Anything. Name it. You hired a private investigator 8 months ago, when I stopped returning your calls. Silence. Then, how did you know? Because you are my sister, and you would not just give up on me. Lauren exhaled slowly. His name is James Mitchell. He has been documenting everything. Grant's movements, his finances, his meetings with that woman from his office. I have a folder 6 inches thick. I need that folder, and I need something else. What? Dad told me about the thermal cameras, about the house, about everything he has been doing for the past 4 years. I took a breath. I need to see the footage from last night, all of it. Caroline. Lauren's voice was gentle. Are you sure, Amelia? It might be hard to watch. I spent 8 hours living it. I think I can handle watching it. The footage arrived an hour later through an encrypted email link. I sat in the guest room with Dorothy's tablet and forced myself to watch. Thermal imaging rendered me as a blob of fading heat. Orange when Grant first locked me in, yellow as my body temperature dropped, green by 3 in the morning when I stopped shivering and started dying. Grant's heat signature stayed steady in the bedroom the entire time. Comfortable, warm, 72 degrees of deliberate cruelty while his pregnant wife froze 12 feet away. I watched myself crawl to the space heater, watch the faint orange glow as I nursed it back to life, watch my temperature stabilize just enough to survive until morning. And I watched Grant's bedroom door open at 6:23, watched him pause in the hallway, check his phone, take a deep breath, practice his concerned expression before opening the garage door. He rehearsed it. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. He stood in the hallway and rehearsed his surprised, concerned husband routine before coming to get me. This was not just abuse. This was performance, calculated, rehearsed. Deliberate performance designed to destroy me while making himself look innocent. I closed the tablet and sat in the darkness of the guest room. I am going to destroy him, I whispered to my daughter. I am going to make sure he never hurts anyone ever again. Lauren arrived in Connecticut the next morning. She had driven through the night from Boston, breaking every speed limit between there and Greenwich. We met at a coffee shop in Stamford, neutral territory, away from the cameras that probably monitored our property, away from the listening ears of staff whose loyalty I could no longer trust. You look like hell, Lauren said as she slid into the booth across from me. Thank you. I wrapped my hands around a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking. I mean it. When did you last sleep? Eat. Do anything except run yourself into the ground. I have been a little busy trying to not get murdered by my husband. Lauren's face went pale. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. Tell me everything. So I did. The garage, the documents in Grant's study, the messages between him and Natalie, Dorothy's information about the phone calls to someone named Marcus, all of it. When I finished, Lauren sat in stunned silence for a long moment. I knew he was bad, she finally said. The PI found enough to know something was seriously wrong. But this, she shook her head, this is attempted murder. Carolyn, this is conspiracy to commit fraud. This is what happens when a desperate man marries a woman he thinks is beneath him. I said, and then discovers she is worth billions. Lauren's eyes widened. He knows. About Dad. About the money. I think he has always known. I think that is why he targeted me in the first place. Lauren pulled a thick folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Everything the PI found: financial records, surveillance photos, background on Natalie Cross. She has been with Grant since before you met him. They never actually broke up. You were just the mark. I finished. I know. I found their messages. There is more. Lauren opened the folder, pointed to a document near the bottom. Grant's personal finances are a disaster. He has $8 million in debt. Gambling, mostly. Bad investments. The shipping company has been covering his losses for years, but now the company itself is failing. So he needed my trust fund. Your trust fund is the only thing keeping him afloat. Lauren's voice was grim. Without it, he is finished. The company goes bankrupt. His debts get called in, his whole life falls apart, which means he will do anything to keep me from leaving. The words hung between us. Anything included locked garages. Anything included psychiatric facilities. Anything included phone calls to men named Marcus about making problems disappear. What do you want to do? Lauren asked. I want to take back control of my life, I said, but I need to be smart about it. Grant has been planning this for years. I have been planning for 2 days. I need more time, more evidence, more leverage. Dad can help with all of that. I know. I looked down at my tea, at the faint ripples on its surface. I was angry at him. When I found out about the cameras, about the house, about everything he has been doing behind my back, he was trying to protect you. He was trying to control me, just like Grant, just in a different way. I met my sister's eyes. But at least Dad's control came from love. Grant's comes from greed. There is a difference. So you will let Dad help? I will let Dad provide resources. I sat up straighter, feeling a spark of the woman I used to be. But I am driving this car. I make the decisions. I run the strategy. This is my fight, my life, my daughter. Lauren smiled. There she is. I was wondering when my baby sister would show up. She has been hiding, but she is not hiding anymore. We left the coffee shop separately. Lauren headed to the rental house Dad had secured in New Haven. I drove back toward Greenwich, toward the beautiful prison I had called home for 4 years. My phone buzzed. A text from Grant. Working late tonight. Do not wait up. I stared at the message. 6 words that would have sent me spiraling into anxiety and self-doubt just a week ago. Was he really working? Was he with Natalie? What had I done wrong? How could I make him love me again? Now I felt nothing but cold determination. Enjoy your evening. I typed back. I will be here when you get home. I would be here, but not for long. The escape plan took 3 days to finalize. 3 days of secret phone calls and encrypted emails and careful coordination. 3 days of pretending everything was normal while Grant watched me with increasing suspicion. Dorothy helped where she could. She accidentally disabled the GPS tracker in my car while cleaning. She forgot to charge the tablet Grant used to monitor my location. She developed a sudden need to run errands that took her away from the house during crucial planning sessions. Lauren provided the logistics. A rental car waiting at the medical complex where I had my next doctor's appointment. A safe house in New Haven, paid for in cash under a name Grant would never think to search for. An emergency bag packed with everything I would need for the first few weeks. Dad provided the legal framework. His attorney, Walter Hayes, had drafted emergency motions that could be filed the moment I was safely away. Divorce papers, custody petitions, restraining orders, everything documented, everything ready. And I provided something none of them could: inside knowledge of Grant's weaknesses. He thinks he is smarter than everyone. I told them during our final planning call, he thinks his charm and his family name make him untouchable. He does not know that I have spent 4 years watching him, learning him, understanding exactly how he operates. That confidence will be his downfall, Walter Hayes said. Men like him always underestimate their victims. I am not a victim anymore. I said, I am a survivor. There is a difference. The escape was scheduled for Thursday. I had a legitimate doctor's appointment that even Grant could not cancel. Dorothy would be at the house, ready to confirm my departure time if anyone asked. Lauren would be waiting in the medical complex parking lot. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. I just had to survive 3 more days. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Perfect weather for an escape. Perfect weather for a new beginning. Grant left for work at 7:30. He kissed my forehead and told me to rest. His performance was flawless. If I did not know about the messages, about the custody documents, about the phone calls to Marcus, I might have believed he actually cared about me. But I did know, and his kiss felt like poison on my skin. I waited 30 minutes after his car disappeared down the driveway. Then I moved. The bag I had packed was hidden in the back of my closet, buried under old sweaters Grant never looked at. Inside was everything I needed. Clothes for a week, my passport, copies of every document I had photographed in Grant's study, the thermal imaging footage on a secure flash drive. Dorothy met me at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes were red like she had been crying. "Be careful," she whispered, "and remember your promise." "I will," I said. "Miguel will have his papers within 6 months. I swear it." She hugged me then, a quick, fierce embrace that said everything words could not. "Go," she said, "before I lose my nerve and beg you to stay where I can watch over you." The drive to the medical complex took 20 minutes. I parked in the patient lot like I always did, walked into the building like it was any other appointment, let the security cameras capture me entering through the main doors. Then I slipped out through the emergency exit on the east side of the building. Lauren's rental car was waiting exactly where she said it would be. I climbed into the passenger seat and felt something I had not felt in 4 years. "Freedom. Go," I said, before I start crying and cannot stop. Lauren pulled out of the parking lot and headed for the highway. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 miles. The tension was too thick, the stakes too high. Then Lauren glanced at me and smiled. "You did it," she said. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you, without Dorothy, without Dad. You are the one who found the courage to leave." Lauren reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mom would be so proud of you, Caroline, so incredibly proud." The mention of our mother brought tears to my eyes. Margaret Porter had died 3 years ago, still hoping her youngest daughter would find her way back home. She never got to meet her granddaughter, never got to see me escape the prison I had built for myself. But Lauren was right. Mom would have been proud. The safe house was a small colonial in a quiet New Haven neighborhood. Nothing fancy, nothing memorable, just 4 walls and a roof and locks on all the doors that only I controlled. I stood in the living room and breathed. For the first time in 4 years, no one was watching me. No one was monitoring my phone. No one was tracking my location. No one was cataloging my every move and using it against me. I was free. The relief lasted exactly 3 hours. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Then another. Then another. I looked at the screen and felt my blood turn to ice. Pictures of me walking into the medical complex, of me leaving through the emergency exit, of me getting into Lauren's car, of the car driving away. Someone had been watching. Someone had followed us. The final text came through. Just 2 sentences that destroyed everything. Emergency custody petition filed. Restraining order in effect. Return to Greenwich immediately or face criminal charges for kidnapping. Kidnapping. They were claiming I had kidnapped my own unborn child. My hands shook as I scrolled through the legal documents that followed. Emergency motions filed in Hartford Superior Court. Allegations of maternal mental instability. Flight risk. Danger to the unborn child. A hearing scheduled for Monday morning to determine temporary custody. If I lost that hearing, Grace could be taken from me the moment she was born. I sank onto the sofa and stared at the wall. All my planning, all my preparation, all my careful coordination with lawyers and family and allies. Grant had been 2 steps ahead the entire time. Lauren found me there an hour later, still staring at nothing. "Caroline," her voice was gentle but urgent. "Talk to me. What happened?" I showed her the documents, watched her face go pale as she read. "How?" she whispered. "How did he know? We were so careful." "The baby registry app," I said dully. "I forgot about it. I logged in this morning to check something. It updated my location." Lauren closed her eyes. "Oh, Caroline." He did not just control my present. I looked down at my belly where my daughter moved. Oblivious to the chaos surrounding her, he weaponized my hope for the future. The phone rang. Dad's number. I answered. "I heard. Dad said, Walter is already working on it. We will fight this, Caroline. We will not let them take your daughter." He was 2 steps ahead of me. I said, "He has been 2 steps ahead this entire time. How am I supposed to win against someone who anticipates my every move?" "By stopping to think like a victim." Dad's voice was firm. "You are Caroline Porter. You graduated top of your class from Yale Law. You walked away from billions of dollars to prove you could make it on your own. You survived 8 hours in a freezing garage through sheer force of will. I am also 8 months pregnant and terrified. Good. Terror means you understand what is at stake. Now channel that terror into action. Come to Houston. We will prepare for the hearing. We will build our case. And we will destroy Grant Mercer so completely that he will spend the rest of his life regretting the day he ever heard your name. I looked at Lauren, at the safe house that was no longer safe, at the legal documents that threatened to take my daughter. Book me a flight, I said. I am coming home. Houston wrapped around me like a blanket. The heat, the humidity, the sprawling chaos of the city that had raised me. I had spent 4 years running from this place. Now it felt like the only safe harbor in a storm that threatened to drown me. Dad met me at the airport himself. William Porter, tech billionaire, usually surrounded by assistants and security. Today he stood alone at the private terminal, looking older than I remembered. Grayer, more fragile. He opened his arms and I walked into them. I am sorry, I said into his shoulder, for everything, for shutting you out, for thinking I could do this alone. You have nothing to apologize for. He held me tighter. You were building your own life. That is what children are supposed to do. I built it on quicksand. Then we will build you a foundation. He pulled back, looked at me with eyes that held 4 years of worry and 3 years of grief. Together this time. The Porter estate sprawled across 40 acres of Texas land. I had grown up here, in these halls, on these grounds. Every corner held memories of a childhood I had taken for granted. Riding lessons with Mom, business dinners with Dad, summer afternoons by the pool with Lauren. The nursery took my breath away. Dad had set it up in my old room. Soft yellow walls, white furniture, a mobile of silver stars hanging over a crib. Everything perfect, everything ready. Mom picked it out, Dad said from the doorway. Before she died, she wanted to be ready for whenever you came home. I sank into the rocking chair by the window and cried. For my mother who had known this was coming. For my father who had watched and waited and never stopped trying. For myself and the years I had wasted on a man who never deserved me. When the tears finally stopped, I felt something unexpected. Not despair, not defeat. Determination. We need to work, I said, standing up. The hearing is in 4 days. Where is Walter? The war room occupied Dad's study. Screens covered the walls displaying financial documents, surveillance footage, legal briefs. 3 attorneys sat at the central table alongside a forensic accountant and a woman I did not recognize. Walter Hayes rose when I entered. He looked like someone's grandfather, but I knew the shark beneath the cardigan. Mrs. Mercer, he began. Porter, I corrected. My name is Caroline Porter. I never should have changed it. Walter smiled. Ms. Porter, we have been building your case. Would you like the overview? I want to run the strategy meeting. I said. Everyone looked at me. I am a lawyer. This is my life, my daughter. I am not going to sit on the sidelines while other people fight my battles. Dad nodded slowly. You heard her. Caroline is lead counsel on her own case. We provide support. The next 3 hours were the most focused of my life. We reviewed every piece of evidence. The thermal imaging footage, Dorothy's statement, delivered via secure video link, the financial records showing Grant's embezzlement, the messages between Grant and Natalie planning my destruction. We also reviewed the challenges. The PI's office was broken into 2 days ago. Walter reported by hard drive stolen. We have backup copies, but the defense will claim fabrication without the original timestamps. Dorothy has been arrested, Lauren added. ICE detained her and Miguel yesterday. Grant made good on his threat. There is more. The forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Foster, pulled up a document. Someone filed a complaint against Dr. Emily Crawford's medical license. She is under investigation for falsifying medical records. Grant was systematically destroying everyone who could help me. What about Marcus Webb? I asked. The man Grant has been calling. The one Dorothy heard him talking about making problems disappear. We are still looking, Walter said. But Miss Porter, I have to be honest. Without Dorothy's testimony, without the original surveillance files, without Dr. Crawford's medical documentation, our case becomes much more difficult. I stared at the screens, at the evidence of Grant's crimes, at the systematic destruction of everyone who had tried to help me. He anticipated this, I said slowly. He knew I would fight back. He has had contingency plans in place for months, maybe years. Then we need to find something he did not anticipate. Dad leaned forward, something he could not plan for. I thought about Grant, about the arrogance that oozed from every pore, about the absolute certainty he had that his charm and his name and his money made him untouchable. And then I thought about Natalie Cross. 12 years. I said, Natalie has been with Grant for 12 years. She has watched him promise to leave his wife. She has watched him make the same promises to other women. She has waited and waited and waited. You think she would turn on him? Lauren asked. I think she has been waiting 12 years for a future that is never going to come. I stood up, my back aching from the baby weight, my mind sharper than it had been in years. I think Grant has taken her for granted the same way he took me for granted. And I think she has no idea how many other women he has been promising the same things. Walter nodded slowly. It is risky. If she warns Grant, then we are no worse off than we are now. I looked around the table at the people who had assembled to fight for me. But if she turns, we have an insider. Someone who knows where all the bodies are buried. Literally or figuratively, Margaret Foster muttered. Maybe both, I said, and that was not a joke. I reached out to Natalie the next morning. The coffee shop I chose was busy and public. Witnesses everywhere. Security cameras visible. No chance for ambush or manipulation. Natalie arrived looking polished and confident, blonde hair perfectly styled, designer clothes that Grant's money had paid for. The smile of a woman who thought she had already won. That smile faltered when she saw my face. I know everything. I said before she could speak. The messages, the plan to have me committed. The 12 years you have been waiting for Grant to leave his wife. Natalie's mask slipped for just a moment. Fear flickered in her eyes before she recovered. I do not know what you are talking about. Yes, you do. I slid a folder across the table. That is a copy of every message between you and Grant from the past 6 months. Every plan, every promise, every lie he told both of us. Natalie did not touch the folder, but her hands were shaking. How many other women has he promised to leave me for? I asked. What? You are not the only one. Natalie, I found payments to 3 other women over the past 4 years. Different names, different accounts, same promises. You are just the one who lasted longest. Her face went white. The confidence crumbled. And I saw something I recognized. Pain, betrayal, the dawning realization that she had been just as used as I was. 12 years, Natalie whispered. I gave him 12 years. And he gave you lies. Just like he gave me lies. Just like he gave every woman who was foolish enough to trust him. Silence stretched between us. The coffee shop buzzed with conversations that had nothing to do with the destruction happening at our table. Why are you telling me this? Natalie finally asked. What do you want? I want you to help me destroy him. I said simply, and I want you to have the satisfaction of watching it happen. Natalie's cooperation changed everything. For 2 hours, she talked. Told me things Grant had hidden from everyone. The real state of his finances. The deals he had made with creditors. The lies he had told his own mother. The recordings she had kept on her phone. Just in case. Just in case turned out to be now. There is something else, Natalie said as we finished. Her voice had gone quiet. Scared. Marcus Webb, the man Grant calls about problems. I sat very still. What about him? I know who he is. Natalie's hands twisted together in her lap. He is a security consultant. He handles things for wealthy clients. Discreet things. Permanent things. Are you saying Grant hired him to kill me? I am saying Grant called him twice the week before the garage incident. And he called him again the morning after you escaped. She met my eyes. And the last time he called. I heard him say that his wife had become a liability that needed to be handled quickly. The coffee shop suddenly felt very cold. The noise around us faded into a dull roar. You heard this, I said. You have proof. I recorded it. Natalie pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I record everything. I have been doing it for years. Insurance, I told myself, in case he ever tried to throw me away. She played the recording. Grant's voice, confident and cold, discussing me like I was a problem to be solved, a liability to be eliminated, an obstacle to be removed. The timeline needs to move up, Grant said on the recording. She is more resourceful than I expected. If she manages to get to her father, everything falls apart. Handle it before the hearing. And Marcus Webb's response, calm and professional, standard rate plus expenses. I will need 24 hours notice when you are ready to proceed. I stared at the phone. at the evidence that my husband had tried to have me murdered. Why? I asked, why did you not go to the police? Why did you let him? Because I was scared. Natalie's voice broke. Because I thought if I just waited a little longer, he would finally choose me. Because I have spent 12 years convincing myself that the ends would justify the means. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But watching him plan to kill you, watching him discuss it like he was ordering lunch, she shook her head. That is when I knew. He would do the same thing to me someday. When I became inconvenient, when I asked too many questions, when I finally demanded the life he had been promising me. I thought about all the women Grant had used, all the lives he had damaged, all the destruction he had caused in his relentless pursuit of money and control. I should hate you, I said. I know, but I do not. I reached across the table and took her hand. Because you are not the enemy. You are just another victim. Another woman who believed his lies. Another person he used and discarded. Natalie squeezed my hand back. What do you need me to do? Testify. Tell the truth. Help me make sure he never hurts anyone ever again. I will. She nodded firmly. I will tell them everything. We left the coffee shop separately. Natalie headed back to Connecticut to gather more evidence. I returned to the Porter estate to prepare for the hearing. Things moved quickly after that. Walter filed the recordings as evidence. Dad's security team located Marcus Webb, who was surprisingly eager to cooperate once he learned that federal authorities were investigating Grant for conspiracy to commit murder. Apparently, even professional fixers had limits, and killing a pregnant woman crossed them. Dorothy was released from detention after Dad's immigration attorneys intervened. She provided her statement via video link, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. But Crawford's investigation was resolved when it became clear that the complaint had been filed fraudulently. She agreed to testify about my injuries, about the hypothermia, about the signs of abuse she had noticed during my pregnancy. The pieces were falling into place. Our case was stronger than ever. And then Grant made his move. 2 days before the hearing, Marcus Webb was found dead in his apartment. Apparent suicide, single gunshot wound, no witnesses, no note. The star witness against Grant Mercer had been silenced. I stood in Dad's study staring at the news report, my hands pressed against my belly where Grace kicked. He killed him. I said, Grant killed him to keep him from testifying. We do not know that, Walter said carefully. Yes, I do. I turned to face the room. Grant told Marcus he was a liability. And then Marcus became a liability to Grant. So Grant handled it, just like he handles everything. Silence. Everyone knew I was right. No one wanted to say it out loud. What do we do now? Lauren asked. We go forward. I said, we have Natalie's recordings. We have Dorothy's testimony. We have Dr. Crawford's medical evidence. We have the financial records and the thermal imaging footage. Is it enough? Dad asked. It has to be. I looked at the screen showing the evidence of Grant's crimes, because the alternative is letting him win. And I am not going to let him win. The night before the hearing, I could not sleep. I wandered the halls of the Porter estate, my hand on my belly, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Grace kicked beneath my fingers. Strong, insistent. A reminder that I was not fighting just for myself anymore. Your father is a monster, I whispered to her. But I am going to make sure he never touches you. I am going to make sure you grow up knowing that your mother fought for you, protected you, built you a life worth living. Grace kicked again, and I took it as agreement. The Hartford courthouse loomed against a gray January sky. 6 months had passed since my escape. 6 months of depositions and motions and counter motions. 6 months of Grant's lawyers trying every trick in the book to delay, deflect, and deny pain. But today, finally, we would face each other in court. I walked into the courtroom flanked by Walter and Lauren. Dad followed behind, his presence a reminder of the resources assembled against Grant Mercer. But this was not his fight. It was mine. Grant sat at the defendant's table looking smaller than I remembered. Prison had not been kind to him. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by ill-fitting clothes that hung on a frame that had lost weight in all the wrong places. The charming smile had faded. The confident posture had crumbled. He looked like what he was, a broken man facing the consequences of a lifetime of cruelty. Judge Patricia Winters presided, 60 years old, with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Grandmother to 4, known for fair but firm sentencing, perfect for this case. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically. The thermal imaging footage played on screens around the courtroom. I watched myself on that garage floor, curled against the cold, fighting to protect my unborn daughter. I did not look away. Neither did the jury. Natalie took the stand and delivered everything she had promised. The recordings, the financial schemes, the phone calls to Marcus Webb, the years of watching Grant promise futures he never intended to deliver. Grant's face went pale as she testified. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see the cracks forming. His mask was slipping. Dorothy testified via video link from Houston. Her voice trembled as she described the night of the garage incident. The screams she had heard, the door she had wanted to unlock, the threats Grant had made to keep her silent. Crawford presented the medical evidence: hypothermia, bruising, the slow accumulation of injuries consistent with years of physical and emotional abuse. And then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand with my back straight and my head high. Grace had been born 2 months ago, delivered via emergency cesarean after I went into early labor from the stress. She was healthy, perfect, waiting for me at home with a nurse Dad had hired. I had survived. We had both survived. Now it was time to make sure Grant never threatened us again. Ms. Porter, the prosecutor began, can you describe the events of January 15th? I looked directly at Grant for the first time since entering the courtroom. He would not meet my eyes. I spoke for 20 minutes, described the garage, the cold, the hours of screaming and pounding on the door, the moment I stopped shivering and knew I was dying, the survival skills that kept me alive until morning. I described the discovery for Grant's plans, the custody documents, the psychiatric evaluation from a doctor I had never met, the messages between him and Natalie planning my destruction. I described the escape, the fear, the constant looking over my shoulder, the legal harassment that followed me across state lines. And I described Marcus Webb, the phone calls Dorothy had overheard, the recordings Natalie had provided, the convenient death that had silenced the only witness who could confirm Grant's murderous intentions. The courtroom was silent when I finished. Even Grant's lawyers had stopped objecting. Ms. Porter, the prosecutor said, is there anything else you would like to say to the court? I stood up straighter, looked at the judge, the jury, the gallery full of reporters and spectators. 4 years ago, I married a man I thought I knew. I said, he systematically isolated me, controlled me, and gaslit me until I forgot who I was. On January 15th, he locked me in a garage at 31 degrees for 8 hours while I was 8 months pregnant. I survived because I refused to die. I escaped because I remembered I was more than his victim. I paused. Let the words settle. I am Grace's mother. I am William Porter's daughter. I am Caroline Porter, and I have never been crazy. I have been controlled by a man who was terrified that someday I would remember my own strength. I looked directly at Grant. He finally met my eyes, and I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Today is that day, I said, and I will never forget my strength again. The defense tried to recover. Grant's lawyers presented character witnesses who testified to his charm, his generosity, his devotion to his family. They attacked my credibility, suggested I was exaggerating, implied that the Porter billions were distorting the truth. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Grant Mercer III was convicted on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, reckless endangerment, federal wire fraud, obstruction of justice. Judge Winters delivered the sentence with a face carved from stone. Mr. Mercer, she said, in 30 years on the bench, I have seen terrible things done by terrible people. But rarely have I seen such a complete disregard for human life from someone who should have known better. Grant swayed in his seat. His lawyer steadied him. You were born into privilege. Judge Winters continued, given every advantage, and you used those advantages to prey on a woman who trusted you, to steal from your own family, to plot murder when your schemes began to unravel. She shuffled her papers, looked directly at Grant. Grant Mercer III, I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison. You will be eligible for parole after serving 15 years. You are prohibited from any contact with your former wife or daughter during your incarceration and for 10 years following your release. The gavel fell. Grant collapsed into his chair, and I felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, not vindication. Peace. 2 years had passed since the trial. I stood in the backyard of my little house in Houston, watching Grace chase butterflies through the garden. 2 years old now, walking and talking and expressing strong opinions about everything from breakfast foods to bedtime stories. She looked nothing like her father. Everyone said she had my eyes, my stubborn chin, my determination. I chose to believe them. Mama, Grace held up a dandelion she had picked. Make a wish. I crouched down to her level, took the dandelion from her small hand, closed my eyes. I wish for this. I thought, for peace, for safety, for the chance to watch my daughter grow up without fear. I blew the seeds into the wind and watched them scatter across the yard. Grace clapped her hands. What did you wish for? If I tell you, it will not come true. I scooped her up, kissed her cheek, and carried her toward the house. Come on, little bug. Time for your nap. The house was modest by Porter standards. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, a neighborhood where people actually knew their neighbors' names. I had bought it with my own money, my salary from the law firm where I had rebuilt my career. I was not a billionaire's daughter here. I was just Caroline, a single mother, a domestic abuse attorney who worked pro bono 1 day a week at a local shelter, a survivor who had found her way back to herself. Dad had wanted me to live at the estate, had offered to build me a house on the property, hire staff, provide security. I had declined. Not because I was running away from him anymore, because I needed to prove to myself that I could stand on my own feet, that the woman Grant had tried to destroy was still in there somewhere. Turns out, she was. I settled Grace into her crib for her nap, then wandered to the kitchen to start dinner. The routine was comforting, normal, everything my life had not been for 4 years. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I stared at it for a long moment. Unknown numbers still made me nervous. Probably always would. Some scars never fully healed. I answered anyway. Caroline. Walter Hayes' voice. I have some news. Good or bad? Both, I suppose. He paused. Grant was denied parole. He will serve his full sentence. Relief washed through me. I had known this was possible. Known he might be released early. Known I might have to face him again someday. Not today, not for another 13 years. Thank you, Walter, for letting me know. There is something else. His voice was careful. He sent you a letter. From prison. I have it here. Burn it. You do not want to know what it says. I know exactly what it says. Manipulation. Blame. False apologies designed to worm his way back into my head. I leaned against the counter, looked out the window at the yard where Grace had been playing moments ago. I am done letting him take up space in my brain. I am done letting him control my emotions. Walter was quiet for a moment. Your mother would be proud of you, he said finally. I know. I smiled despite myself. She told me once that the best revenge was living well. I did not understand what she meant at the time. And now I understand that revenge is not the point. I watched a butterfly land on the window ledge. The same kind Grace had been chasing. Living is the point. Being happy is the point. Raising my daughter to know that she is loved and safe and strong. The Porter Foundation had grown since the trial. Dad ran it now, with input from me and Lauren. 12 safe houses across 5 states. A hotline that answered around the clock. Legal aid that had helped thousands of women escape their own prisons. I served on the board, testified before legislators about domestic abuse laws, spoke at conferences about recognizing the signs of coercive control, but I did not let it consume me. I had learned that lesson the hard way. Some days were harder than others. Some nights I still woke up in a cold sweat, dreaming of garage floors and frosted windows, and the feeling of my body slowly shutting down. Some moments, a certain tone of voice or a particular phrase would send me spiraling back to that place of helplessness and fear. But those moments were fewer now, and shorter, and I had learned to recognize them, sit with them, let them pass. Therapy helped. Time helped. Grace helped most of all. That evening, after dinner and bath time and 3 bedtime stories, I sat on Grace's bedroom floor and watched her sleep. The nightlight cast soft shadows across walls covered in butterfly paintings she had made at daycare. My phone buzzed. I checked it, expecting Lauren or Dad. Unknown number? A text message. 15 years is not forever. I think about you and Grace every day. Gee. The old fear flickered, the familiar tightness in my chest, the instinct to panic, to run, to hide. I let myself feel it, let it wash through me like a wave, let it pass. Then I screenshot the message, forwarded it to Walter and the district attorney, blocked the number, and deleted the conversation. Grant Mercer was a ghost from another life. He had no power over me anymore. His threats were empty. His obsession was his own prison. I was free. I leaned over Grace's crib and kissed her forehead. She stirred but did not wake. Some people think the best revenge is success. I whispered to her. It is not. The best revenge is not caring whether your enemy exists at all. I stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the Houston night, at the stars that were the same stars I had wished on as a little girl. And today, for the first time in years, I do not, Grace murmured in her sleep. Something that might have been Mama. Something that might have been Butterfly. Something that was definitely happy. I smiled, turned off the light, went to my own room to sleep the peaceful sleep of someone who had survived the worst and come out stronger. The coldest night of my life had led me here, to this little house, to this beautiful daughter, to this version of myself that I had forgotten existed. Grant Mercer had tried to freeze me to death. Instead, he had set me free. And that was the real ending. Not revenge, not destruction, not watching my enemy suffer. Just me, just Grace, just a life worth living. Just the beginning.